That's all we need.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tigers Down Under, the very last one for this season, in fact. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Brad. How are you, Brad?
Hey, mate. How you going?
Very good, very good. Yeah, we had a few technical difficulties there, which was apologies everyone watching along. A bit of a late start for this one, but got there in the end, and we'll get straight into it, I reckon. Look, we'll do a small recap of that last game of the season just before we move into reflecting on the season, looking at potential changes to the personnel over the off season as well. But we'll just do a quick review of that last game of the season first of all, since we haven't had an episode between then and now. 1-1 draw with Forest. I think it was 3 changes to the side from the previous game. Longman, Elder, and Slater all coming into the side. Basically, rotating those wing backs, and then Eves obviously had the red card, so Slater came in for him as well. As far as end of the season games go, it was a pretty typical end of the season game. I think for most of the game, it felt pretty sort of, players going at 70%, Forest resting a few players for the playoffs, us not having a whole lot to play for. And then, all of a sudden, last 5 minutes of the game, 2 minutes of the game, really, it all sort of kicked off. First of all, with the penalty given away by Huddleston, and then sort of moments later with the last kick of the game, Coyle/KLP getting the equaliser right at the end. But how did you see it, Brad? Good way to tick off the season?
Yeah, I think it was. And, I mean, a point against Forest is pretty welcome. But I think, like you said, it was a pretty dour, low-key, end-of-season type game where, to be honest, it probably could have been 2-0 either way late in the game. But probably the only thing that was interesting there was just the fact that we didn't look that unfazed with anything. At times, Forest, they ran around us a little bit and probably looked more like a team on the up than the down. But for us anyway, I just felt like, well, we showed that when we relaxed on the ball, we were pretty much matched it with them. But I still don't take anything out of it to say, oh, that's how we'll start next season, because we know a lot can change by then. But probably the thing that I didn't mind out of the whole sort of game, if you like, was the fact that we didn't just relax totally. I think we've been guilty at times of taking our foot off the pedal and looking horrible for 15 or 20 minutes. But I think at the moment, you could wrap that game into a nice little 10-minute highlights package, and that's probably all you need to worry about.
Yeah, that's right. I think, as you said, I mean, it's hard to take too much out of the game in terms of how we'll start next season, especially because, as you say, I mean, we don't know who's going to be there. A lot can change in the off season in terms of personnel. We did get to see Tom Huddleston come on for a farewell appearance. I mean, putting aside the fact I don't know if he necessarily knew it was a farewell appearance before the game, it was good to see him out on the pitch again and, reminding us of what a player he is. I thought his range of passing, his ability to sort of, break down the tempo and sort of, keep us in possession of the ball at times as well. It's a shame that he hasn't been able to stay fit and stay on the pitch more this season, because he showed that he's still got that class and that ability. It's just, I think his body's just starting to let him down a bit.
Yeah, look, I agree, mate. I don't think there was any coincidence that I think he came on with about 15 minutes to go. And the last, well, probably more like last 5 minutes, but the last 10 minutes was more exciting from both teams. And I think it's because they started pinging a few passes around and really happy to try and see what anyone could get out of the game, because it was pretty much looking like a nil all pretty dour performance, if you like. But yeah, look, it's a shame in a way, because we all love Huddleston. We all know that the guy can play, and he can play at this level. But I think we said when we first signed him that, yeah, look, we'd be happy to have him as a squad player. But I think, as we found out a few times this year, the squad players really need to be majority fit. And that was the hardest thing for him. He never got a real crack at it anyway, to be fair, but that was mainly because of injuries and form.
Yeah, that's right. Soft penalty, fair penalty. How did you say it?
Look, I think we'd probably have to say a little bit soft, but there's been 10 times worse this year. I just love how they never seem to fall in our lap. When we get the chance to look at something similar. We've had dodgy handballs at away games, and you're like, well, we can see it on one camera angle, let alone about 5, and a referee basically being right there. But look, in the end, I don't think anyone was disappointed with the draw. So the pen was probably okay. I mean, you know as well, there was times there where they definitely looked a better side than us. It's just that they couldn't really get it on track. And I don't know how many shots they had, but they seemed to have a lot more than us.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I don't know what the shot count was. To be honest, certainly a shot that counted for us was the shot right at the end from Louis Coyle. I think it was a couple of the apps and a couple of things did credit it to Lewis Potter. I don't think he gets a touch on it. I think if anything, he's just sort of putting the keeper off a bit with where the ball's going to bounce, where the ball's going to end up heading towards the goal. And I think it just sails right through from Louis Coyle. So pretty perfect way for him to cap off the season.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll have to give it to him. I don't think KLP got a touch. That's where we'll play it. KLP got enough goals and touches this year anyway. Look, good to see him get on the sheet, and probably in a way, nice little bit of confidence for him to round off the year. And fingers crossed leading into next year. That's another string to the bow to say, well, I can score goals.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I mean, I'm just looking on Google. It's still saying Lewis Potter got the goal. I don't really believe that. Forrest had twice as many shots as us, but only one more shot on target than us. So that might say something in and of itself. I guess probably a bit more dominant on the ball, but at the end of the day, I guess we took our chances a bit more clinically than they did.
Yeah, and I think probably, I know there's not specifically a tackle count for the game, if you like, but we did seem to try and get in there. Or we were first to the 50-50s a lot more than them. Now, that might be because they're looking down the eye of playoffs and trying to preserve themselves a little bit at that point. But I thought we probably gave away just as many fouls as them, but I thought we were actually first to the ball in the 50-50s a lot as well, which is good, again, for our last game of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Good end to the season. Well, look, we'll talk personnel movements now. I mean, we sort of already alluded to there, Huddleston playing his last game for us. I think Shotter confirmed that after the match with Burnsy. It seems as if that was done before telling Huddleston. I don't quite know what's going on there. Maybe there was something lost in translation in a conversation with him. Another Tom Eaves today, I think, was announced that he's also departing the club. That one, I mean, I see as a sort of predictable change, but I also think the fact that he put in some pretty impressive performances since Shotter's come into the club, since Ajun's come into the club even, I could see a chance that he'd stick around for another year, extend his contract. It'd be reasonably cheap, solid depth as a player. And then we're seeing, I think it's Wilkes is going to get a contract extension. I think Shotter's talking about giving him or triggering his 1 year extension. And I think that's the main sort of ins and outs, so to speak, so far. We haven't heard too much about, I think it's Smallwood, Honeyman, Elder, and a couple of the others, and Wilkes and a couple of the others who have that 1 year extension available on their deal, but haven't yet had it triggered or haven't yet signed new deals. Obviously, Ingram, another one as well. So first of all, I guess, what do you make of, the news about Huddleston and Eaves? We sort of already touched on Huddleston. And then I guess of those players out of contract, who would you like to see stick around?
Well, look, I think Eaves was a surprise because, again, we get back to trying to, we're not going to win or get promoted out of the championship next season with just the best 5 or 6 players we can put on the park. We're going to need 20 to 24 really good squad players to get through the long season, which we always talk about. So I was surprised with Eaves, because I know he's much maligned, and in the end, he is a striker. He shows he can score goals, sometimes very opportunistic, sometimes they fall in his lap, but he's there. And I would imagine that he's only probably on a salary range similar to what most of our average players are. So normally I would expect someone like Eaves to be going because of a wage issue. We're not getting our value, if you like, but I would say that seeing his salary must be mid squad. with maybe some goal bonuses. I don't think he hurts the purse strings next year. So that was probably a little bit of a surprise.
Well,
I was
just going to say, I'll just add, because we've just got Logan has joined us, so I'll add him to the conversation as well. But you go on, Brad. You're just talking about the player departures.
Yeah, so I think the other one you mentioned was Honeyman. Again, I don't think he's re-signed, but he's certainly a pretty important part of the squad, and I wouldn't imagine he'd be shopping around. So it's obviously just a matter of terms. And I think was the other one that you mentioned as well was Wilkes has been offered a contract.
Wilkes, I think they're triggering the 1 year extension, and then Elder, Ingram, Logan. I don't know if you know all the players, or that sort of group of players who are out of contract and we're potentially offering extensions to, potentially triggering the 1 year extensions. We've got a press conference coming up tomorrow with the Jun. Do you reckon maybe there's going to be a big announcement of a whole bunch of players having re-signed deals, Logan?
Look, I found that a really interesting thing, and I can't wait for this press conference, because if you actually, consider all of the rumors and speculation that came around, when Ajun took over, was that there was, going to be mass change, and we were looking at, potentially upwards in front of 9 or 10 signings. So the reality is that that's yet to happen. And I guess that, depending on, assuming that, Shotter's going to be the manager who starts off next season and takes the reins, he's done enough to keep his position. I would imagine some of the conversations in the backroom staff at the moment would be very interesting as to what kind of level of change we're going to expect to see. A lot of those players that you're mentioning are definitely players who probably can cut it in the championship, but I guess it probably has to line up with our ambition. Like if we're looking to cut it in the championship, then I think a lot of those deals will, you will see come to fruition, and they will add on the year clause and all the rest of it. However, if there's a real championship, run or potential that we might be gunning for those playoff spots, then I'd expect a lot of, additions to be coming in and some fresh faces. So how that press conference goes tomorrow is going to be incredibly interesting.
Yeah, Brad, I mean, you sort of said before, we're not going to get promoted from the championship just with 5 or 6 good players. We need to have a whole squad of good players. We've got a couple of names that have been linked that, we'd heard Traore's name linked a little while ago, and now there's reports that he's signed a deal. Although, again, maybe that's something that, this brilliant press conference tomorrow could have 20 seats around the table, because we might be announcing a fair few re-signings and new signings as well. I guess I'll start with you, Brad. I mean, what do you make of, I guess, a lot of these names that we've been linked to being players playing in Turkey? I mean, we had the conversations in January about all the players coming in being from Turkey. I think one of the players linked is Ghanaian, so it's not as if we're just signing Turkish players. Do you sort of hope we're still going to be looking in England at, either championship players who, for instance, Sheffield United have been knocked out of the playoffs now. Maybe there's an opportunity to get some players that if they need to shed their wages or things like that. Do you think we should be looking more locally as well?
Well, look, I think so. I think as well, it's great to be linked to these players, but probably for every 10 that get thrown up, we might land one. And it still, to me anyway, gets back to the fact that with the change of ownership and what you would say is the reasonably prudent approach so far that we've seen the owners take is they're obviously going to make some transfer budget available or at least a wage bill available. But it doesn't surprise me to maybe think that as owners, that wage budget for next year is not going to be extraordinary. It might be good enough to get a real marquee type player in or two. But I mean, I think there's still enough players around us that are looking for a second chance or looking for regular games or even out of favour because of managers. I mean, there's been a lot of turnover of managers in the Championship and League One in the last 2 years that mean there's a lot of players that may be looking for some stability. And I hate to say it because I don't want to jinx it, but for once we might actually have a little bit.
Look, it's a fair point as well. I hadn't even considered that angle about managers moving on. I mean, there's probably some players even at clubs like Barnsley and Derby who, I mean, Derby in particular have a certain player that we've been linked to a couple of times Logan and Curtis Davies, who may well join the club again. Who knows? But I mean, Logan, some of the names we've been linked to, I guess, just to reiterate a report we saw this morning, Fernando at Italia Sport spent a couple of seasons in Serie A. I think the Hull City Italy account says he seemed to have a reasonably good season at Sampdoria, so seemed reasonably positive. And then I think it was Benjamin Tete at Yeni Malatyaspor. He's, I think, 24 years old, has 7 goals and 23 for them as well, are probably the 2 players that we've been linked to. And it sounds like Tete is probably the more realistic of those 2. I guess sort of like with what Brad was saying, are you sort of happy to be linked with these sorts of players? Are you if they're reasonably cheap, or would you rather see a few more, I guess, more reliable, trustworthy options closer to home, perhaps?
I think it's nice to be linked with anyone after the recent Allen race, where we knew that we were going to be operating under a shoestring budget until there was a sale of the club. So I think, first and foremost, to be linked with some of these, exotic players, if you will, I think it's probably a sign of the times that there is a much higher level of ambition, with the new owner in place. And I think that's something that we can certainly be confident about. Whether that's the right direction. I mean, as City fans, and particularly in recent times, we've seen, some players from overseas come in, and we've had some, very fond internationals do a job for us. I mean, you think about Hernandez and some of the overseas stock who have really just made City a home. But then at the same time, we think about the Bruce regime, and it was the core of domestic players, and particularly the Irish lads as well, that really, solidified that kind of working class ethic. And we kind of built somewhat of a culture under him again, where, players wanted to play for the club, and it was that City-like player that we really enjoy seeing. So, look, I think you've seen both models work. That that it probably works with a really good domestic group, and then a couple of flair players on top. That seems to be my experience of what I've enjoyed seeing, and I think that's probably closer to what we will see. So just to see a couple of these, I remember when the new owner signed, there was all sorts of Turkish speculation of who was coming in, and there was 9 or 10 Turkish players, and Mesut Ozil was on his way, and there's all kinds of stuff like that. So look, I think it can be really interesting to see what happens. And I still remember that, Shoda's finding his feet. He's very new to the championship in itself. And so how they choose to approach it is going to be very interesting. And I think Andy Dawson may have a big say in particularly, the type of players who we may be after.
Very nice segue. I was just about to ask Brad, having talked about player movements, we've also had a coaching movement with Andy Dawson appointed to the first team coaching staff up from the under 23s. And if we want to talk about building a core of local products, I think having Dawson moving into the ranks of first team coaches really underlines the fact that that's quite at the core of what this club is trying to do and what this club is trying to continue doing. So what did you make of the news of, a club legend like Andy Dawson getting that gig?
Oh, well, look, we all loved him as a player, and we probably realised how hard and tough mentally he actually is, and how much his heart's in the club. Even probably forgetting the Premier League days, just the fact that he was so committed to the club. Everyone's an admirer from afar, and obviously his reputation as a coach, or at least someone who's advancing players, has been rewarded by what we've seen with the new appointment. So I think, getting back to what Logan was saying is exactly right. You sort of want to have a nice, somewhat homegrown core to whatever else, madness-wise goes on around that. But there's no doubt that every time we've had either a promotion-chasing season or we've actually got promoted, we've had a really good core or spine of good, solid, almost call them sort of everyday players, and having a sprinkle of overseas flair, especially around goal, I think is the big area. We've got to score more goals. We've got to get more and more in line with the fact that our young defenders are going to get better with experience, and the fact that we've still got a reasonably well-aged squad, that bringing in a couple of overseas players, especially in the attacking third, is probably where you would expect Arjun to be looking at spending his money anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Hopefully, Ali coming in on a permanent deal will be one of those. Yeah, Logan, what did you make of the Andy Dawson appointment? I mean, there was a bit of worry initially about who would fill that role, how long it would take to fill the role. So to see him appointed was great news.
Oh, absolutely was, and I think it's just another one of the big ticks for the fans. Like as far as what Ajun said that he was going to be looking to do, and wants to really create that, I guess, that family club kind of culture again. It's something that he impressed on everyone when he signed, and it's certainly evidence of him sticking to his word. And I think that's also kind of Brad alluded to it as well. That's not to discount Andy Dawson's credentials. Like I know sometimes we can very quickly say, oh, well, he's City through and through, so he'll do a good job. But let's not forget the job that he's been doing, at the club already. And it just seems like a natural fit. And I think it's one that, we have those romantic relationships with the City players who do a job on the field and want to come back and give back to the club, like your Dean Windasses and whatnot. So Andy Dawson's certainly someone who it's a familiar face that fans certainly will love to see around. And I think, if he was to be part of a success story of another promotion, well, we'll just become to love him even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll move on then. I had hoped we'd have Dan here to run over how our preseason predictions went, but I think he's a little bit delayed. We'll see if he can get on before the end of the episode. But if not, we did a bit of a prediction at the start of the season about a few of the few things. And the first was the finishing position, which we both had said would be between 12th and 16th. So perhaps both a little optimistic there with our final finishing place. But the one that I found more interesting was for our most important player of the season. So Dan went with either Honeyman or Magennis. His reasoning for Magennis being that we need to be scoring more goals, and that if we're going to be doing that, Magennis will need to step up. Fair to say that probably didn't work out so well for Magennis getting his move away to Wigan in January. But Honeyman, I mean, his logic being Honeyman's matured a lot from his last season in the Championship. I thought Honeyman had a pretty strong season. I think when he was fit and playing, he was a really solid contributor this season. I don't think quite to the same extent as last season, but I think, coming with that step up from League One to the Championship, that's most likely to be the case. I went with Greaves, and I'm going to claim a win on that one. I think Greaves was one of our more important players, playing every minute of the campaign, and the number of goals that we conceded as well was a pretty impressive season for him. So I guess starting with you, Brad, who did you see as our most important player this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think, like you said, that I don't think there was a standout from start to finish. I mean, KLP bobbed up with goals, and without him, we know what things could have looked like. But I'd have to agree with you with Greaves, is that for a young fella who stood up, rarely got beaten, and he is young, as far as central defender goes, he's got so much time up his sleeve and such a career. And I sort of liken him to the fact that when we looked our best is when we looked defensively like we weren't going to get broken down. And some of that was obviously credit to the midfield as well. But look, I think probably Greaves as an individual, but I think some of those more central midfielders, the Honeyman-Smallwood combinations, there was games where they both weren't available and we looked terrible and we looked like we'd lost shape and all those sorts of things. So I think I'll give it to Greaves, but I think you could argue probably, which is a good thing, that we probably had 4 or 5 genuinely better players this year, whereas in previous years there's been a standout. And that's probably the reason why we actually had a bit of a run there.
Yeah, I think I think Smallwood's a great shout for that role as well. Logan, what did you think?
Yeah, look, KLP, obviously, just his contribution in goals would have to say has made him the, I guess certainly the star of the season. And I mean, the rumours and speculations of him being traded and the clubs that are kind of coming in for him probably suggest that he was our most crucial player. It's hard to make a case against Greaves. I think you're right. He's incredibly impressive and as you said, just reliable. I don't know if this is probably not answering the question, but I just wanted to give a kind of honourable mention to Fleming and McLaughlin, because I think that they're two players who, certainly weren't in any level of conversation of being important or having huge roles. And towards the end of the season, they both kind of, revealed themselves to be incredibly important players to the setup. And I know that later on in the season we had that horrific loss to Bristol, which didn't really reflect just how good we had been defensively in the later parts of the season. So I think that, all things considered, yes, KLP is the star man. I think that Greg's had a huge season. I think Baxter was great in goals as well. But there was a couple of sneaky people who popped up that I think are certainly worth talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess the other preseason prediction we did was the biggest red flag. So after 2 months or 8 games, if this had occurred, we'd be pretty worried about our chances for the season. Dan's, both of ours followed the same theme, but Dan's was if we're not scoring consistently, so he wanted to see at least 8 to 10 goals in the first 8 games to give us a chance of staying up. After the first game, you'd think, easy, 4 goals on the opening day against Preston, we'll be completely fine in the scoring stocks. And we only scored 1 more goal for the next 7 games, which is crazy when you consider that scoring run on the first day of the season to how that ended up over the next couple of weeks. Mine, along a similar theme, was that we needed Wilkes or KLP to have scored, which KLP did on the opening day, and that we needed 15 goals between them for the season. And I think Wilkes got 4 and KLP debatably got 11 if we're going to count that last goal of the season. So just squeaked into the 15 goals. But I mean, looking back on it, Logan, I'll start with you, but looking back on it, that start to the season, I mean, from the highs of that opening day to the real concerns around where our goals were going to come from and what was actually going to happen with the team over those first couple of months was a bit of a worry.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, as you mentioned, the Preston game gave us a real false sense of security. And let's not remember how serious of a threat relegation was for a long part of this season. So, I mean, I guess if you're going back to the previous question with who the most important player was, and, KLP had the largest goal return, that probably answers the question in itself, realizing how crucial his contributions were. But yeah, it was really fascinating. Hindsight's a beautiful thing, but when you're able to dissect the season, it probably speaks to the importance of how well we really did rally after those first kind of 10 games, after the win on the opening day, and then a horrible patch that, had things looking pretty grim around Christmas. But, as we sit here now comfortably celebrating the fact that we'll still be playing championship football, there are a lot of really positive takeaways from this season. And I guess when you encompass the fact that it also came with an ownership change, it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Brad, how are you feeling sitting there after the first 2 months of the season? Just about, I think we'd scored 5 or 6 goals. We got a draw against Bournemouth, I think, and somebody else who'd been doing reasonably well as well. So, it wasn't as if we weren't picking up a few points here and there, but just weren't able to get any wins on the board.
No, and I think it was probably, like you said, it wasn't like it was disastrous, but you just had this feeling, right, here we go again. We're going to look like we've got all this promise and we'll ground out results against or even get 3 points against teams we shouldn't, but then those around us, or, a Tuesday night at home, we drop points to someone that we shouldn't, and you just start thinking this is going to go down to the last month and give us all grey hair. But I think probably the only thing, like Logan mentioned before as well, that at least KLP was around and fit. And so we knew that even if we were boring, we should be able to score the odd goal that kept us up. The problem there was defensively we were leaking and not looking settled or fantastic. And it may be the other change with goalkeeper, and maybe a few things during the year that really made a difference. But at this point, we're all probably thinking it was time for the Allams to definitely go, because we're at our lowest again. And anything that could show some sort of promise, we were hanging on to a bit.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I guess before we do move on to those end of season awards, I mean, we're sort of already doing a couple of them here. We've alluded to it a few times, and you've just mentioned there, Brad. Logan, I'll start with you, I guess. Reflecting on that ownership change coming as it did halfway through the season, I look back on the first episode of this season. I think you and I were talking about the potential for the ownership change. There was the rumors about Ajun. We were sort of sitting here saying, oh yeah, here we go again. It's another rumor. It's going to linger around for a couple of weeks or a month or two, and then it's going to fade away just like all of the others have. as it got closer to happening and as it became more and more concrete and that excitement sort of grew and the speculation grew about what it would mean for the club, as we sit here now on the other side of it, new owners able to be excited and, you know, optimistic about next season. We've sort of already talked about it with the potential for signings, but just what does it mean to you to have that sort of breath of fresh air in the club and what it can mean for the club going forward?
I think it's just it's the joy of being able to be optimistic about it again. I think that you know, it was such a toxic kind of ownership fans relationship for so long that even when the times were good and we'd have like big wins, you never really felt like it was going somewhere. Like it always had a ceiling. So you'd kind of have a couple of wins and it was, you know, things were looking optimistic. But then you realize that, oh, actually, no, you'd have a couple of losses or there'd be some level of injury and you'd go, oh, well, you know, this is a problem. And, you know, it's just also the unsettled nature of Grant McCann. Like, I mean, there was just so much uncertainty. And I think that that's the most exciting part for me about a John coming in is now we're able to sit there and go, okay, we kind of get a fresh slate. And we've been told, you know, some of the things that he values as an owner. And we're starting to see the fruits of that. So I'm not expecting, you know, an amazing season next year where there's a huge level of investment. You know, we get promoted, although there's a possibility for it. And, you know, it would be nice. I still think that, you know, the fans are probably happy now to have a couple of seasons where, you know, I wouldn't say mediocrity, but where we've got just a steady build. I think that would be comfortable. Whereas I think under the Allams, that was probably the best it was going to get. And I think that's probably, you know, as we try to break it down, the big takeaway is there's a reason to be optimistic.
Yeah. Brad, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably no coincidence that once we actually got settled there, I know we had a bit of a rocky, let's say, second, third month with the new manager in charge, but we were picking up points, we were scoring goals. Whether the system was working or not didn't really matter. The selections matched what most of us expected. Although, you know, Eves getting a game here or there when we didn't was a bit of a surprise. But it's still, I thought he, from afar anyway, the manager did manage the players pretty well. And I think that's something we're going to go into our first season for a while where we've got some promise of money, not much, but some. A manager that's reasonably settled, and not to mention a squad that's more than 12 players. So all these things mean we're actually going to get a pre-season in that could really be helpful. And it sounds like off the field, the resources the club have got at their disposal are as good as they've probably ever been in the championship.
Yeah, well, we've got an airline now.
That's right, apparently so. And we've got ambitions. You know, we've got an owner that hasn't just come in and said, right, here's $10 million to loan some player for the rest of the season just to keep the fans happy. There's been a bit of a real sort of a methodical approach to who we've signed. And I think that, you know, the owner wants us to be in the Premier League. He's made it pretty clear, but I think he knows that it might not just happen in 1 year if you splash cash. It's going to take a few years of building yourself up and a bit of luck. So I'm quite optimistic about next year. I think we showed against top teams that we aren't that far away, and especially, like I keep banging on about, it's a 40-game season thereabouts. And so if you can really grind out some of those results, you know, 10, 12 more points in this division pushes you a long way up the table.
Yeah, I think when you look at our goals conceded, it's top 6 quality already or thereabouts. And you just think if we add a bit of attacking talent, where that might take us. All right, let's move on to those end of season awards then. So we do have a few categories that we're going to run through, hopefully not putting you two on the spot too much to think of some of these. But we'll start with favorite goal of the season. And maybe if you guys haven't thought of one, I'll go first to give you a bit of time to think. But I think for me, and I'm sort of maybe cheating a little bit going outside the league games, but maybe for me, the most exciting goal of my favorite goal was Ryan Longman's equaliser in the FA Cup against Everton to take us to extra time. I thought, you know, Tyler Smith scoring the first goal after 20 seconds or a minute or whatever it was pretty exciting as well. But to go up against Premier League opposition, to fall behind in the game, and then the manner in which he scored that goal to send us to extra time, I thought was fantastic. Very typical Ryan Longman goal. He did score a few of these over the course of the season, but that was probably my favourite. Brad, did you have one?
Look, mine wasn't actually, let's say, a spectacular goal of sorts, but I had to give it to KLP because he had a few good ones to choose from. And while I love the fact that we've got him in our squad, he's not my favourite player. He's close to. But I thought that the goal against Middlesbrough, although the goalkeeper made it look a lot better than it was from the edge of the box, that goal and those points were that's a real 6-point game, if you like. And it meant at the time that I actually thought we could stay up. Whereas I think leading up to that game, we were always dragged down into the mud quite a bit at times. And I think that was the first time I went, well, previous to his goal, I think Middlesbrough had one goal ruled offside, hit the post. Keeper made a great save, so we should have been 1 or 2-0 down, and all of a sudden KLP backs himself, shoots, their keeper makes a bit of a mare of it, and we're 1-0 up and get the points. And that's when I probably felt like it turned our situation around a bit. So it's more for importance than quality, because I think probably his rocket that he scored against Peterborough was probably my favourite. But I'm going to give it to the Middlesbrough one.
Good shout. How about you, Logan?
This is a really easy one for me, and it's actually another Longman goal, but it was the smash and grab goal against Bournemouth, which I thought was just, when you're looking at back now, I mean, Bournemouth, a team that got automatically promoted, traveling down there, and it was just one of those games where I remember I believe it was the first 20 minutes, we were just getting peppered. I think they might have hit the post like 4 or 5 times. It was ridiculous. And then we kind of just got a foothold in the game, didn't really offer too much. And then when Longman scored and put us in a commanding position for 3 points, you just thought, how has this actually happened? And you could kind of see from the celebration that everyone was in shock. We celebrated accordingly, but I thought that was just one of those real gutsy heart goals, and it kind of summed up the whole performance. So that one for me was critical.
Was that McCann's last game or his second last game?
It was around the time.
It would have been around the time. Yeah, that's right. Because I was going to say, because our next category is our favourite game of the season. So I guess sort of a bit related to the goal, but sort of your overall favourite game of the season. And for this one, the reason I asked that question is I've gone with the first game under Ajun's reign against Blackburn, where we won 2-0, which I feel like maybe this was McCann's last game, if not that Bournemouth game. This game, it was just, the script is written perfectly. I mean, Ajun gets unveiled on the pitch, everyone's pumped up. It's, the night, the game under lights, Sky cameras as well, I think. Everyone excited, pumped up. I think was it Honeyman got the first goal with an Eves assist, and then Eves got the second goal to seal the game in that one. And it was just, I think Blackburn were third or second in the table at the time, so they were really flying, and we sort of ground them to a halt and took the 3 points quite convincingly. And this was, of course, the rearranged fixture after the Boxing Day shambles of a postponement, as one Blackburn player put it. So a good result in that one. Logan, did you have a favourite game to go with?
Yeah, I still think that, the opening day, the 4-1 victory against Preston, I know that sometimes it probably doesn't feel like it hit the same magnitude as other games with the survival, because it was so early in the season. But to score 4 goals on the opening day and, see everyone celebrating like that, it had us in such a mood of, what this season could be. And so, yeah, that was a pretty big game to watch.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism after that game, which was, and I think I posted the thing today that I think that game put us first in the table for 7 days. So we were one of only 4 teams to occupy first place. So pretty decent game. Brad, did you have a favourite?
Look, I agree with you. The Blackburn one had all the PR and pizzazz about it, but I'm going to change it because it was only when Logan mentioned the Bournemouth goal. Of all the games this year that I would have loved to have attended, it would have been an away day at Bournemouth when no one gave us any chance. We pinched points. And, I mean, you can imagine you'd be going mental in that crowd. You'd be singing all the way home. So I think I'll give it to the away day at Bournemouth, just more for the experience than the game itself.
Oh, yeah, I think when that goal went in, the limbs would have been pretty ridiculous. So certainly would have been great to be part of. Our next category is most improved player. Now, this one's a little bit tough to think of in some circumstances, I guess, because it's hard to compare, I guess, the playing squad last season in League One to this season. But this one was the sort of the player that you thought improved the most over the course of the season, or sort of took the league by storm. I've gone with Brandon Fleming, who, had a pretty reasonable role over the last couple of seasons. I think he played a little bit in that championship season we went down, and certainly a bit more last season. But I thought his performances this season, I mean, I sort of compared him a little bit early on to a young Andy Robertson. And I think he's certainly the most, attacking left back that we've had since Andy Robertson. I think the way that he can take players on, get past 2 or 3 opposition players, whip a ball into the box. We saw him linking up a few times really well with Eves from that left-hand side, linking up really well with KLP as well, and Greaves as sort of the Hull-born trio. And I think he's taken himself from being one of those young players who's around the squad getting the odd minute to being a legitimate first 11 or sort of top 15 player at the club now. And I think that's a huge improvement from him. Brad, did you have a most improved player?
Yeah, look, I think it's no surprise because we've already talked about it, but I just think Greaves stepping up from, we know he played a lot of games last year, and he was very good last year too, don't get me wrong, but we all know the difference between League One and Championship is a decent jump. Some say the biggest jump of all the divisions. And, I mean, he barely missed a minute. He was that good in multiple changes of formations, with changes of managers, with days where he would have had the toughest day at the office because we were defensively not going well, whereas last year was a bit different. It's easy to be a central defender when you had the squad we had last year. And like you pointed to, the fact that we had one of, a pretty miserly defence for a first year back in the Championship, I think is a pretty big attribute for him. And the guy's only 21 or something. I mean, he's phenomenal. I think he played literally, he reminded me a lot of Michael Dawson. Basically just stood up every game he could all year. I think he played all bar one game or all bar two.
No,
games.
I think he played every minute. Him
Right.
and KLP, I think, played every minute of the campaign, which is ridiculous to have 2 players at the club do that.
Yeah, and I think we all know KLP's good, and I agree with you. I thought Fleming's growth was massive, but I think Greaves, you're almost looking at a Premier League defender already, and yet he's just stepped up from League One last year, and so he's my most improved, if you like.
Yeah, great shout. And Logan?
Yeah, look, I think both of you guys have really targeted on 2 awesome ones, but I don't want to let this question pass me by. I think that it's really hard for us to quantify just how much KLP has improved this season. I think that, it's very easy to say that, he's our player of the season and he was the most critical with his goals scored. But let's remember that last year, he's still a very young player himself, but to play League One, to get the England call up as well, and to have had the goal return and assist that he did in Championship football, I just think he's immense. And it's no reason that, it's no coincidence, that he's been linked to, to very decent Premier League clubs already. And I think it's because you see that every single time we get into the final third, there's one player that looks genuinely threatening for us all the time, and it's always him. He just produces things out of nothing. And it's interesting, as you talked about whether he's got 10 or 11 goals. If you go back and look at some of the chances that he's had and the times he's hit the posts, there's some genuinely world-class goals that, are only a whisker away from being added to that goal tally. And I think that that's only going to come as he gets older. So for me, he was, the most improved by some distance.
Yeah, no doubt. And that brings us on to our main award. And as you say there, I mean, he's the club player of the season. He's the players player of the season. He's the supporters player of the season. And of course, KLP is also our player of the season, amassing a massive total of votes over the course of the season. I don't have it in front of me, but I think Honeyman won our award last season in front of second by maybe 8-10 votes. I think it was a reasonably close run thing. The reason we didn't even give votes for the Nottingham Forest game is because Lewis Potter was just so far in front. I had the graphic already done up. But yeah, 47 votes in front of Honeyman and Ingram rounding out the top 3. Pretty close for both of them. Ingram, getting a lot of votes early on for his performances in those, sort of 0-0 or 1-0 losses where he kept the score down quite considerably. And then McLaughlin rounding out the top 4. I think McLaughlin, just quickly before we wrap things up, I think McLaughlin is another in that conversation for most improved, in the sense that he just wasn't in the side all that much, and then he's sort of come into the team and really made that spot his own at the back alongside Graves. So having a really great season as well. But yeah, look, I think that sort of rounds things up for the season. Were there any kind of closing thoughts or overarching thoughts of the season that we've just experienced, Logan?
Look, I think that, again, if we talk about what this season will be remembered for, it's the ownership change. And I think that we'll be able to draw a really clear line in the sand that although we've stayed up and, we're still guaranteed championship football next season, I think that is by far and away the biggest thing that has happened in this 2022 season.
Yeah, no doubt. And Brad, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, look, I agree with Logan that the ownership's, massive. It happens hopefully not too many more times in our lifetime. But the thing that I'm probably wrapped with, considering where we were at, and this probably goes a lot to this last few months, we ended up beating the drop. I know with dubious circumstances, but we were like 15 points off the drop. Now, any of us at the start of the year, if we basically were told, look, 9 points above or 6 points above the drop, yep, you take that. But 15 points above the drop and some really good showings against good teams shows us that the brickwork's there. It's ready to go. We've just got to be able to hang on to KLP and keep bolstering this squad. But here's one for you, Alex. Although you do a massive job during the year, mate, and well done. If KLP was to go, now I have touched wood, rubbed Buddha's belly, done everything on this, what is the price tag going to be?
I would think it would have to be around 18 to 20 million. I can't see us selling him for much less than that. I know Arjun sort of said in January he wouldn't sell him for less than 20. And I think it's a matter now of if KLP wants to go, it's hard to keep a player that doesn't want to be here on the books. And I think we try and get top dollar for him. It seems like there's a lot of interest, a lot of rival bids for him. So you'd think that would drive the price up as well. But yeah, you'd be looking, I mean, it's sort of remarkable to say, even as I say it, because you're looking at probably close to 20 million, if not a bit more. And that's almost what Bowen went for. And you look what Bowen's doing already this season, sort of 18 months after leaving us. I guess that's sort of the nature of inflated prices. But how about you? What do you see him going for?
Oh, look, you would hope that you'd squeeze every penny, like you said, and maybe get closer to 25, but then you're in real rare air up there. But like with Bowen, most of us probably thought he wasn't technically worth that sort of price tag. He's very good, and we know what he could do, but you're going up quite a standard, and of course he's just shown through. So no, it was more just interesting to see what you guys sort of would have as a price tag for it. Yeah,
Logan, what do you think about 20 million?
Yeah, look, I can't see anyone coming in and offering more than that, but at the same time, the fact that he would have to be 20 million or worth 20 million pounds to us, and I think that's kind of the value that you have to place on it, because for a Premier League club to come in and pay that, you see that kind of quite regularly. But I think it's one of those interesting things from a City fan now, as we see these signings. And you never want to be that club that, thinks their players are just, over the top better than the rest, although it's, reality of most football fans. But if we look at the heights that Andy Robertson and Harry Maguire and Jared Bowen, as Brad said, have reached, I think it really makes you reevaluate the price tag on someone like Kane Lewis-Potter when he's trending in exactly the same direction. So, if you're going to sell him for 20, you kind of want to make sure that there's all those bonus add-ons too that ends up waiting to 30 down the track if he ends up being that type of player. And I think that's what I'd like to see in an ideal world.
Do you mean the Harry Maguire 4 years down the track transfer percentage back to us job? That's what we're after.
Right. That's what we're after, and probably with Bowen as well. I mean, I'm sort of hoping if a Man City or a Liverpool come in for Bowen and spend 80 million on him, it will be a nice sell-on clause for us as well on that Absolutely.
One. And a good one just on that 20 mil, Alex, is, I mean, what would our wage budget be for a year? 15?
Yeah, if that.
You could almost go out in that free transfer market and get some pretty decent quality Prem-based type players to build a pretty attacking front 3 or 4 with that sort of wage budget. I'm not saying it's a long-term solution, but that's where that problem lies with getting so much money in the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, hey, just quickly before we go, get the super early predictions from each of you. It doesn't have to be a specific league position, but what sort of bracket are you seeing us finishing in next season? Is it going to be top half? Is it top 6, top 2, bottom half? Logan, where do you sense we'll be finishing up?
Look, I think that Brad's kind of touched on it already. I think that he's shown us that there's a lot of things to be positive about with the core that we have. And I think that if, and I know that depending on tomorrow's press announcement, we find out what's happening with the playing group. I think playoffs is the goal next season. I think it's a realistic goal. I don't think it's one that, we're kind of, everyone says, oh, I'd love to be in the playoffs. I think it's a genuine target. And I think anything short of that would be, somewhat disappointing.
Hey, look at Huddersfield season. They were pretty much where we were last season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we target top 6.
Brad?
Yeah, I'm hoping Logan's right. I think we'll sneak into the top 10. And I have a feeling that KLP will go. That's why I was asking. I don't want him to, of course. But what concerns me is we didn't score enough goals this year. And if KLP does go, then we're really relying on 2 to 3 to cover that, which is hard. But I definitely think top 10. Yeah, I think we might bounce around a bit, but 10, 9, 8, I think we'll just miss out on playoffs, but we're not genuinely there.
Yeah,
So
I think I'm
right.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. I think I'm sort of somewhere in between you both. I think come this time next season, we'll probably miss the playoffs, but we'll be disappointed to have missed the playoffs. I think we'll be in that conversation for most of the season, and at least I hope we are. And I want to be sitting. I don't want to be sitting here disappointed at missing the playoffs. I want to be sitting here having achieved automatic promotion. But if you know what I mean, if I'm sitting here next season disappointed at missing the playoffs, then really I'd consider that a pretty successful season. That if we've actually had that challenge, we've had that realistic chance of making the playoffs at the very least, so if that's sort of 8th, 9th in the table, I'd be pretty happy to take that. So look, hopefully it's a really exciting season ahead. We're sort of, just finishing off this season. We're already looking ahead to next season. It's a lot to look forward to, especially with that press conference tomorrow. We don't know what could be discussed there. But look, thanks both of you. Brad, Logan, thanks so much for the season that we've had. Thanks for coming on for this episode, recapping the season that we've had, and looking forward to sharing it all again with you next season.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks for all of the work that you've done to get the podcast to the state that it's in at the moment. It's always a good time to talk City, particularly when there's positive things on the horizon.
Absolutely. And of course, thanks everyone for listening in over the course of the season. As always, we really appreciate all the support that we get from you guys. If you haven't already, give the video a like, hit the subscribe button, and share the video around as well. Let us know your thoughts on your favorite moments and memories from this season past. And then until next season, come on, City.